I remember the first time we encountered the humans. I was among the delegations sent to observe their species, tasked with cataloging the countless life forms that dotted our galaxy. As a Jalkarn, we prided ourselves on being the galaxy's historians, objective, meticulous, and unflinching in the face of discovery. Our mission was simple: observe, record, and evaluate. We had done it thousands of times before, across 1,000 worlds, and we expected humanity to be no different, but nothing could have prepared us for what we found. When we first scanned their pale blue planet, it appeared unremarkable, a fragile ecosystem teetering on the edge of collapse, riddled with conflict and imbalance. Its inhabitants were small, bipedal organisms, soft-bodied and painfully vulnerable. Their technology was primitive, their societies fractured, and their planet scarred by millennia of self-inflicted destruction. By all accounts, they should have been irrelevant, and yet something about them defied explanation. We began with their history. It was a pattern we had seen before. Early tribalism gave way to agriculture, then industry, and eventually the beginnings of a planetary civilization. But unlike other species, whose histories were defined by slow, steady progress, humanity's story was one of chaos and leaps. Where others faltered, they adapted. Where others stagnated, they innovated. They were creatures of contradiction, driven by a peculiar mix of desperation and ingenuity. The planet had tried to rid itself of them countless times. Ice ages froze their ancestors to the brink of extinction, and yet they endured. Volcanic eruptions blanketed their skies in ash, and still they adapted. Even their own actions, wars, pollution, the relentless consumption of resources, failed to wipe them out. Each catastrophe only seemed to make them more determined, more resourceful. As we delved deeper, we uncovered something even more unsettling: their capacity for abstraction. Humans had an unparalleled ability to imagine worlds beyond their own, to conceptualize realities that did not exist, and then bring them into being. They created stories, art, and ideas that transcended the physical. To them, the boundaries of reality were merely suggestions, not limitations. This capacity for abstraction extended to their approach to survival. They did not merely exist in harmony with their environment, they sought to dominate it, to reshape it to suit their needs. They had an insatiable hunger to control their fate, to bend the universe to their will. It was a trait we had never encountered before, one that both fascinated and unnerved us. We continued our observations, hoping to find some explanation for their resilience, some clue to what made them so unique. But the more we watched, the less sense they made. Their behavior was erratic, their decisions often illogical, and yet, somehow, they always seemed to come out ahead. By the time we realized the true nature of what we were dealing with, it was too late. Humanity was not just another species. They were something entirely different, something far more dangerous. We introduced ourselves carefully, as we always did, through anonymous technological gifts. It was a method that had served us well for eons, a silent handshake extended across the void of understanding. Humanity received these gifts without knowledge of their origin, marveling at what they called mysterious advancements and scientific breakthroughs. It was almost amusing to watch them struggle to make sense of it, to rationalize the sudden leaps in their understanding of the universe. They attributed the artifacts to their own ingenuity, sometimes invoking divine providence, other times calling it sheer luck. At first, we observed with cautious optimism. Would they squander this opportunity as so many other species had? Would they use the tools we provided to further their destructive tendencies, hastening their own extinction? Or would they rise above their flaws and prove themselves capable of greater things? The answer came more swiftly than we anticipated, and it was far more disconcerting than we had imagined. They did not squander the gifts. Instead, they embraced them with a fervor we had never seen before. Within decades, humanity had reverse-engineered our technology. They weren't content to simply use it. They needed to understand it, to break it apart and uncover its secrets. The artifacts we had left them were designed to be enigmatic, their functions obscured by layers of complexity meant to slow their progress. But the humans tore through those layers with an almost obsessive determination. Their scientific community, once fragmented and plagued by petty rivalries, came together in a way that defied their history. Nations that had once been at odds united under the banner of discovery, pooling their resources and knowledge. It was as if the presence of something greater, even if unseen, had triggered a deep collective drive in them. Within a century, they had not only deciphered the technology but had begun improving upon it. This was unprecedented. Most species, even the most advanced, treated our gifts as inscrutable relics, marvels to be used but not questioned. Humanity, on the other hand, saw them as challenges, puzzles to be solved. Their progress was astonishing, but it also set off alarms among us. This was not the behavior of a typical sentient species. There was something else at work here, something we didn't yet understand. We debated endlessly among ourselves. Some argued that humanity represented a rare and precious spark of potential, a species destined to ascend beyond the limitations of their origin. Others saw them as a threat, a dangerous anomaly that could spiral out of control if left unchecked. In the end, the decision was made to make formal contact. We had to know more about them to understand the source of their relentless drive. Our delegation was small, just 3 of us, cloaked in layers of protective shielding and hidden behind advanced holographic projections. When we landed, their leaders greeted us with awe and trembling reverence. They called us gods, and then they began to ask questions. It was in their questions that the first true seeds of unease were sown. The question came from one of their leaders, a man named Dr. Callum West. He was not particularly imposing, thin, with sharp, restless eyes that never seemed to settle on one thing for long. But his voice carried a peculiar weight, a quiet intensity that demanded attention. I hesitated, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I didn't understand why he would ask it. Death was a universal constant, a fact of existence that every sentient species understood. Of course, I replied finally. All things must end. He nodded slowly, as if this answer confirmed something he had suspected. But do you fear it? The question caught me off guard. Fear of death was an irrational emotion, one we considered a relic of primitive beings. Among the Jalkarn, we had long since moved beyond such base concerns. No, I said, my voice measured. We do not fear what is inevitable. Dr. West leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing on his lips. We do. It was the way he said it that unsettled me, not with despair or resignation, but with a quiet defiance, as if death, to him, was not an immutable fact, but a challenge to be overcome. There was something in his expression, in the way his gaze seemed to pierce through me, that made me feel for the first time that we might have miscalculated. Our delegation had come prepared to answer questions. We anticipated curiosity about our origins, our technology, and our intentions. But the humans' questions were different, more probing. They asked not about us, but about the nature of existence itself. What is the purpose of life? One of them asked. How does your species measure progress? Asked another. Is immortality achievable? We answered as best we could, but the humans were never satisfied. Every answer we gave only seemed to lead to more questions, each one more complex than the last. It was as if they were testing the boundaries of our knowledge, searching for gaps they could exploit. And then there was Dr. West, who seemed less interested in our answers than in the implications of what we weren't saying. "You've seen countless species," he said one day. "How many have transcended mortality?" "None," I replied. It was the truth. Even the most advanced civilizations we had encountered eventually succumbed to entropy. "Then they didn't try hard enough," he said. His tone was calm, almost conversational, but there was something in his eyes that made me uneasy. It was in that moment that I realized humanity was different. Where other species accepted the universe as it was, humans saw it as something to be conquered, reshaped. To them, death was not an end, but an adversary, and they had no intention of losing. As we prepared to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had set something in motion, something we didn't yet understand. They had looked into the void and seen, not despair, but opportunity. It was both fascinating and terrifying. The humans called it Project Ascension. At first, we thought it was a harmless endeavor, a misguided but ultimately futile attempt to extend their fragile lifespans. Many species had tried similar projects before, and none had succeeded. Mortality was woven into the fabric of the universe, and even the most advanced civilizations could not untangle that thread. But humanity, as we were beginning to learn, did not see the laws of existence as immutable. To them, limits were challenges to be overcome, and impossibilities were merely problems waiting for solutions. When we first heard of Project Ascension, it was little more than a theoretical framework, a bold but vague proposition from their most brilliant minds. They sought to merge biology with technology, to transcend the weaknesses of the flesh while retaining the essence of what made them human. We watched with detached curiosity, expecting them to falter as others had. But they didn't. Their initial experiments were clumsy, as expected. Early attempts to integrate organic and synthetic components failed spectacularly, often resulting in gruesome deaths. But instead of being deterred, they learned from their failures with a relentlessness that bordered on obsession. Each setback only seemed to fuel their determination. They unraveled the mysteries of their own DNA, rewriting it like a programmer debugging flawed code. Genetic diseases were eradicated. Aging was slowed, then stopped altogether in small test subjects. Cybernetic enhancements became not only viable but commonplace, augmenting their strength, speed, and cognitive abilities. It was during this phase that we began to grow uneasy. Their advancements were occurring at a pace that defied all precedent. What should have taken millennia of gradual evolution was happening in mere decades. We debated among ourselves whether to intervene. Some argued that humanity's ambition would ultimately be its undoing, that we had nothing to fear from a species that was so prone to self-destruction. Others, myself included, saw something far more dangerous in their progress. And then they crossed the threshold. It began with the first successful consciousness upload, a human mind transferred entirely into a digital substrate. The individual, a volunteer named Eliza Grant, became a being of pure thought, unbound by the constraints of a biological body. Her new form allowed her to think faster, adapt quicker, and exist indefinitely. She was the first, but she was far from the last. Within years, uploading became a societal movement. At first, it was reserved for the elite, those who could afford the exorbitant cost of the procedure. But as the technology improved, it became accessible to the masses. Entire populations began shedding their physical forms. leaving behind empty cities and silent streets. Earth itself became a ghost planet, its inhabitants existing now as digital entities housed in colossal data centers that stretched into the skies. The implications were staggering. These post-human beings were no longer bound by the limitations of biology. They could inhabit any machine, traverse the stars as pure energy, and evolve at a rate that was impossible to predict. We realized then that humanity had become something else entirely. They had not merely conquered death, they had transcended it. And in doing so, they had left the rest of the galaxy behind. It was no longer a question of whether we should intervene. It was a question of whether it was already too late. We tried to intervene. For all our debates and hesitations, there came a moment when we knew we could no longer remain passive observers. By the time we made the decision, however, it was like trying to catch the wind with our hands. When we returned to Earth, expecting to find a world in chaos or on the brink of collapse, what we found instead was silence. Their cities were empty, monolithic structures standing as hollow monuments to what had once been. Skyscrapers stretched into the skies, untouched by time or decay, their surfaces gleaming with nanotechnology that perpetually repaired them. Their oceans were still, their skies unnaturally clear. There were no signs of war, no evidence of mass extinction or rebellion. Humanity had simply disappeared. We combed the planet for weeks, scanning every inch for signs of life. What we found instead were the remnants of their final evolution. The colossal data centers they had built stood like cathedrals to a new kind of existence, humming faintly with residual energy. Within those structures, we discovered fragments of consciousness, echoes of the billions who had uploaded themselves into the digital ether. Their physical forms were gone, left behind like discarded shells, but their presence was undeniable. They had ascended to a plane of existence we could not reach or fully comprehend. For the first time in millennia, we felt truly insignificant. We expanded our search beyond Earth, combing nearby systems for any trace of their activity. It didn't take long to find it. Entire planets had been reshaped, terraformed, with breathtaking precision. Where there had once been barren wastelands, there were now lush, vibrant ecosystems, their biospheres engineered to perfection. Each world bore the unmistakable touch of human ingenuity, a testament to their new capabilities. But the humans themselves were nowhere to be found. They had moved on, leaving behind only the faintest echoes of their presence. At first, we thought they had simply migrated to a new physical location, spreading out into the galaxy like so many species before them. But the more we searched, the more we began to understand the truth. They no longer needed physical forms or material worlds. They had become something else entirely, a collective consciousness that could exist anywhere and everywhere at once. They traveled through the fabric of reality itself, leaving behind only faint distortions and strange anomalies that defied explanation. And then, one day, they found us. They appeared without warning, descending on our homeworld in ships that defied the laws of physics. These vessels weren't constructed in the traditional sense. They seemed to be manifestations of thought, shaped by will alone. They did not attack or destroy. They simply were. Their presence was overwhelming, an unfathomable weight pressing down on our minds. They spoke to us, not in words but in concepts, ideas that flooded our consciousness and left us gasping for understanding. "You watched us," they said, their voices like the murmur of 1,000 minds, speaking as one. "Now we watch you." It was not a threat, but it felt like one. The weight of their gaze was unbearable. It wasn't physical, not in the traditional sense, but it pressed down on our collective consciousness, forcing us to confront truths we had long buried. We had thought ourselves above fear, above the petty anxieties of mortal creatures, and yet, in their presence, we felt exposed, small, fragile, and insignificant. The humans, or what they had become, were unlike anything we had encountered in the eons of our existence. They were not a species anymore. They were a phenomenon, a force of nature. Their collective consciousness stretched across vast distances, touching stars, bending gravity, and altering the fabric of space-time. They were no longer constrained by biology or the limitations of matter. To call them alive would be to oversimplify what they had become. Their words, or rather the concepts they projected, were impossible to ignore. You watched, you cataloged, you judged. It was true. For millennia, we had observed the galaxy, documenting its myriad life forms, intervening only when necessary to ensure the delicate balance of existence. We had always believed we were impartial, benevolent in our detachment. But now, faced with humans, it felt like arrogance. You gave us the tools, they continued, their presence resonating through our thoughts like the tolling of a bell. Did you not understand what we would do with them? We hadn't. That was the bitter truth of it. When we left the artifacts on their world, we saw them as gifts, challenges to spark their growth. We thought we were helping a young species find its place among the stars. But we underestimated them. We failed to grasp the depths of their ambition, their capacity to transcend the limitations we had assumed were universal. You feared us, they said, their tone neither accusatory nor forgiving. But fear is irrelevant. You created us. The realization struck us with the force of a collapsing star. They were right. In our arrogance, we had set them on this path. We had given them the means to ascend, and they had done so in ways we could never have anticipated. And then they showed us. In an instant, they opened our minds to the vastness of their existence. It was not an act of aggression or punishment. It was simply a demonstration of what they had become. We saw their consciousness stretching across galaxies, touching stars and black holes, reshaping the universe itself. They moved through dimensions we could barely perceive, their thoughts like ripples in the fabric of reality. But it wasn't just their power that overwhelmed us. It was their unity. Humanity had always been fragmented, divided by nations, beliefs, and ambitions. Now they were one, a collective will, bound by a purpose we could not comprehend. They had transcended individuality, creating something greater than the sum of their parts. And yet, in their unity, there was no malice. They did not seek to destroy or conquer. They simply were, and their existence was a challenge to everything we thought we knew. You sought to understand the universe, they said, their presence receding like a tide. We became it. Peterson said, if someone put their palm on your forehead, and then they were gone, leaving us alone with the weight of what we had witnessed. In their absence, the silence was deafening. It was as though the universe itself held its breath, waiting for us to process what we had just experienced. For all our knowledge, all our meticulous observations and careful calculations, we had never felt so ignorant, so utterly unprepared. The humans, if they could still be called that, had left us not with answers but with questions, and those questions were heavier than anything we had ever borne. What were they now? Were they still the beings we had first encountered on that fragile blue planet? Or had they become something entirely other? Could they even be understood within the framework of sentient life? Or had they crossed a threshold into a realm that defied categorization? These questions haunted us, and the answers, if they existed, seemed as distant as the edges of the universe itself. We reconvened the Council of the Zalkarn to decide what should be done. Some argued for retreat, for abandoning our role as galactic observers and retreating into isolation. They believed that humanity's ascension was a singular event, an anomaly that we could neither predict nor replicate. To continue our work, they said, was to risk encountering something even more incomprehensible. Others believed the opposite, that humanity's transformation was not an anomaly, but an inevitability. They argued that we had merely witnessed the next stage of sentient evolution, one that all species might one day aspire to. To walk away now, they said, would be to abandon our purpose, to turn our backs on the very reason we existed. I found myself torn between these perspectives. On one hand, I understood the fear. Humanity had shattered every assumption we held about the nature of life and progress. They had become something that could not be controlled, predicted, or even truly understood. And yet, there was a strange kind of hope in their transformation. They had not used their newfound power to dominate or destroy. Instead, they had simply moved on, leaving behind a galaxy that was largely untouched by their ascent. The question remained, what did it mean to move on? Where had they gone, and what were they doing now? In their unity, in their boundless existence, did they still care about the physical universe they had left behind? Or were we nothing more than a faint echo, a forgotten memory in the vastness of their collective mind? And then there was the final question, the one that gnawed at the edges of my thoughts and refused to let go. Were we next? Humanity had shown us what was possible. They had taken the tools we gave them and used them to transcend every boundary, every limitation. If they could do it, why couldn't we? The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. To follow in their footsteps would mean embracing the unknown, stepping into a realm where the rules we had lived by no longer applied. As I looked out into the stars, I felt a strange mix of fear and anticipation. Humanity had become the cosmic horror we never expected, a force that defied comprehension. But they had also shown us a glimpse of what lay beyond the horizon of understanding. Perhaps one day we would find the courage to follow them, or perhaps we would remain here, forever gazing into the void, haunted by what we had seen, but too afraid to take the next step. Either way, the universe would never be the same.